watching Veracity Hill. Here is your host, Dr. J.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here for another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on New Testament contradictions. Today I'll be looking at Dr. Bart Ehrman's top 3 New Testament alleged contradictions. There's a candidate, we'll call it, my friend Mike calls them candidates for errors, and I would say alleged contradictions. The question is the jury out or not? I mean, of course, there are going to be people that are insistent, no, it's a contradiction right there. Well, it's a surface level contradiction. Is it a contradiction in reality? We're going to be looking at Bart Ehrman's top 3. There are, we must state humbly, other challenges, other examples of alleged contradictions, but these 3 come from an interview that Bart had with MythVision. And so we'll be looking at that, about 12-minute clip or so, and I'll be looking at each of the 3 examples, offering proposed solutions, plausible solutions, not just logical possibilities for how to smash texts together so that way they can work, but something that seems a bit more palatable, something that's like, yeah, that seems like it could make sense. Now, is it a slam dunk case? In some of these, I think so. In others, not so much. There's not always an easy, quick answer for everything. There are, in the scriptures, some more challenging passages in scriptures that have to be reconciled, I think. And so people have their different solutions for how to reconcile those. And sometimes people conclude that there are errors in the text. Well, I'll be talking about Ehrman's perspective on this, errors in the text. I'll be talking about inerrancy, what that means, compared to, say, infallibility. I'll be commenting on Ehrman's remarks that he makes on this podcast interview from a couple years back. And we very well may be getting into some ways that different apologists have for tackling differences in the Gospels, we'll say. We'll see if it gets brought up. I am monitoring the live chat if you've got questions. Before we jump in, though, I've got a few announcements I want to make. In just a few weeks' time, so here we are, I've got a PowerPoint up, episode 251. We've crossed the 250,000 mark. So for this episode, I wanted to pick a New Testament subject. It's something that's been on my mind. And we'll probably have more New Testament historical Jesus subjects throughout the coming months. It's just been on my mind a bit more. But Core Theology is up in a few weeks for what is the doctrine of predestination all about. I have a debate coming up, an in-person formal debate, not one of these internet debates that you see people having that sometimes just are very poorly done. Very cheap value, little preparation. This will be a formal debate with a friend of mine, Sean Luke, and we'll be debating the question of whether Romans 9 teaches corporate election. And this debate will be in person at the office of Defenders Media here in downtown West Chicago, Illinois, where we produce Veracity Hill. And it'll be live streamed as well. If you are not local, you cannot make it, we can seat 40 to 50 people in our meeting space. It'll be the first time we're doing so. We're really excited about it. If you wanted to sign up to come in person for this event, you can go to veracityhill.com/events or just go to the main site, click on the events tab, and it'll take you to details about this Romans 9 debate. August 29th, it's a Friday night. What better thing to do on a Friday night, 7 to 9 p.m., than to watch a debate on Romans 9, some good theological discussion coming up between myself and my friend Sean Luke. And let us go to another event that you may see at that website is a men's golf retreat in September that Veracity Hill is putting on, September 19 to 21. It'll be a weekend up in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, and it'll be a fun time of fellowship, hitting quite a bit of golf balls, maybe fewer swings if you're good at golf. You'll get more swings in if you're not so good at golf. If you want to join me for a weekend of that fun fellowship, theological discussions, talking about apologetics, whatever's on your mind, come hang out with me for a weekend and take in the beautiful autumn colors from up north. For more information, go to veracityhill.com/events or /golf, veracityhill.com/golf. You can get details, an all-inclusive price. It'll be a lot of fun, and I hope you'll consider joining me. We have a registration deadline of September 5th, which is admittedly entirely arbitrary. But no, we do want to call the golf courses ahead with numbers of people that we're expecting. So, yes, so you can check that out. Okay, we also have, last announcement, we have a challenge grant of $10,000 thanks to the board of directors at Defenders Media. If you have enjoyed the videos coming out of Veracity Hill, if you've found yourself sharing these resources with others, you've grown, you've had a greater understanding of the Christian worldview, whether you're a Christian or even not a Christian. In past years, we've even had non-Christians donating to the work we're doing here, which we're very grateful for. And I think what drew non-Christians to even financially support this ministry was that I try to foster fair dialogue. I do strive to understand the other side fairly, and I also strive to present a fair case, be thoughtful in my responses, and I hope that you're going to see that with today's conversation with Dr. Ehrman. So if you find yourself in a position to be able to give at the present time, please consider making a one-time contribution. You can go to veracityhill.com/donate and effectively have your funds doubled today. So please consider doing that. And of course, if you want to become a monthly partner, we would love to get your support for that as well. And your funds will be effectively doubled here for the next couple months. The challenge grant is good through the end of October before we kick off year-end fundraising efforts. So please consider supporting us in that way. All right, well, let's get to it. I know my computer's being a little wonky on me. It's kind of readjusting back and forth, but hopefully we'll get through the issues. So what this will require is for me to load up the YouTube video, and we will work our way over there. You're going to see some messy icons. I need to find where I had that. Here we go. The MythVision interview with Bart Ehrman. We're going to take one at a time, so we'll listen in on the little brief intro. And like I said, it's a 12-minute clip here. And let's listen into what Bart Ehrman has to say for his top 3 New Testament contradictions. That's what Sir Salty, he's asking, what's this stream about? Today we're tackling Bart Ehrman's top 3 alleged New Testament contradictions. I don't think they're contradictions, and I'll explain why. And you also won't find me smashing the passages of Scripture together to harmonize them. So you may find yourself receiving a different explanation than what you may have heard in the past about some of these examples.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, the first thing I want you to do, go down in the description, check out the upcoming webinar on the nativity of Jesus Christ. Is it fact? Is it myth? Is it legend? Did it really happen? What's going on?
We're going to skip ahead already.
Ladies and gentlemen, the myth, the legend himself is here joining me today. How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Yeah, doing well. Looking forward to this webinar. It's going to be an all-day affair.
All right, well, so if you didn't know, that's Bart Ehrman on the right, and you've got Derek of MythVision on the left, and they're talking about some webinar from a couple of years ago.
4 lectures with Q&A after each happened. Oh my God, it's really good.
Jesus birth, but either way, I mean, not be ducked by too many
just jump right to it.
And contradictions. They're all subjective. This is your decision, and we'll just start with one and work from there. I'd like to pick 3 to 5 major contradictions in the New Testament that you really enjoy.
Okay, I'll tell you, first one I'll tell you is the one that made me realize that that the Bible's not inerrant. If people have read my stuff, they might have heard this one. But in Mark chapter 2, so let me just say, I was a fundamentalist. I thought there was no mistakes in the Bible of any kind, no contradictions. I could explain anything. And so like fundamentalists today still can. And so in Mark chapter.
So he describes himself not as just a former Christian, but a former fundamentalist. And I really think that's a good way to describe it. And here's why. I've read a number of Bart's books. I've read a number of his articles online. I've had conversations with him. He came to an event we did back in 2019. And, I also did this Misquoting Ehrman series that Bart shared at his website. So I've really gotten a flavor, a feel for the way he describes his beliefs. And what I think is happening when we're looking at Bart Ehrman's objections to Christianity, I actually find ourselves dealing with Bart Ehrman's objections to fundamentalism, not to Christianity. So they're objections to fundamentalist Christianity, but they're not objections to Christianity. So now some of them would be more core objections to Christianity, but what you're going to see here in these top 3 contradictions isn't an objection to Christianity, but to fundamentalist interpretations of these alleged contradictions. And that a non-fundamentalist reading of the text can be faithful to the story that the evangelists, the gospel authors, provide, and deem that they're historically reliable, and even deem that they do not have an error in them, but it's not the fundamentalist interpretation that you're going to hear from Bart. So what he's objecting to is a more wooden reading of the Gospels, and that itself is not a defeater for Christianity, just one flavor of Christianity. I hope that makes sense, but I appreciated the way he described that there, that he was a former fundamentalist, and really this Mark chapter 2 example he's about to give kind of was the beginning point for a reframing and understanding of him. I just think he reframed or deconstructed, to use a more more modern term for what happened decades ago for him. He deconstructed the wrong way, I think.
Chapter 2, Jesus' disciples are going through the fields of grain. It's a Sabbath. They're hungry. They peel off some grain. They start eating it. And the Pharisees see them doing it. I guess Pharisees are in every corner in Galilee watching to see if people are eating grain on the Sabbath. They're doing it. And the Pharisees get really upset. And they say, Jesus, your disciples are harvesting grain on the Sabbath. You can't do that. And tell them to stop. And Jesus says, look, don't you remember what King David did when Abiathar was the high priest? He went into the temple and ate the showbread with his people, with his men, because they were hungry, even though only the priests are supposed to eat it. Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And so you have the story. So I had this class at Princeton Seminary, a Greek interpretation of Mark. My first semester is like we studied Mark in Greek, and at the end we had to write a term paper. I wrote a term paper on this passage because this passage says that this took place in the Old Testament when Abiathar was the high priest. But the Old Testament says that it took place when Ahimelech was the high priest, Abiathar's father. So I wrote a 30-page paper arguing that, in fact, even though it says that Abiathar was the high priest, it means that Ahimelech was the high priest. It's a very complicated argument, and with the grammar of the Greek and style, I already saw 30 pages later, boom, it really was Ahimelech, and Jesus knew it. So at the end, my teacher was very pious and very devout Christian, but he wasn't a fundamentalist, but he was a very devout Christian. And he liked my paper, gave me an A on the paper. Then at the bottom he said...
So notice here, the way he's talked about his professor already. The way he's talked about his professor is that the professor was a Christian, very intelligent guy, but he wasn't a fundamentalist. So right away, I want to demonstrate that one logically possible category for someone when they're considering these worldview issues is that you can be a Christian and not hold to fundamentalist readings. Now, he's going to say what the professor said, that maybe Mark made a mistake or something like that. So you might deny inerrancy, for example, and still be a Christian. And if you are a non-Christian, I want to encourage you to consider this possible route. Now, that's not the conclusion I hold. I do hold to the inerrancy of Scripture. But if you find yourself disagreeing with me, still give the Christian worldview a hearing. That a trivial issue here and there, maybe even a handful, still is so minor in compared to the weight of the positive case for Christianity, to the cumulative case for Christianity. So don't let a handful of possible historical errors, again, I don't think that there are errors there, don't let those stand in the way of the entirety of the case.
Maybe Mark just made a mistake. And I thought, that would be easier than a 30-page paper that's dancing around the problem. Yeah, okay. So once I realized that, it opened the floodgate. After that, I started finding all sorts of contradictions. And the thing is that sometimes they're big and sometimes they're little. But if somebody's a fundamentalist, the big ones don't bother you because you can explain those away. Those are easy. It's the little ones that you think, oh, God, how do you do that? For example, here's another favorite one of mine.
Okay, so he's going to get to number 2. So let's jump back to my PowerPoint and look at 4 or 5 possible solutions here. I think I've just got 4 categories, and we'll load it up for you as a nice, helpful aid. And I'm hoping it'll play nicely with me. I know, again, it's been adjusting. All right, so we've got 4 possible solutions. In Mark 2, Jesus references that Abiathar, or Abiathar, the way Bart pronounced it, Abiathar, was the high priest when David ate the holy bread, the consecrated bread from the temple. And the problem with this is that when you go to 1 Samuel, you see that it was Ahimelech who was the high priest at the time. Now, Abiathar was the son of Ahimelech, so there's this relation there. But what are some possible solutions for understanding this? Well, Dan Wallace, who's a New Testament scholar, he's written a nice article outlining the different categories. So I just want to run through these possible solutions for you. And the way he categorizes them are just ever slightly differently. And I want to describe for you where maybe he's got those categories and some other possible interpretations. Okay, the first one, possible solution A, maybe there's a manuscript error. Maybe Jesus in history actually said Ahimelech, but in the manuscript tradition that was relayed, there was an error. There was a copyist, for example, that thought Jesus was making a mistake, and he corrected it and wrote Abiathar, and then that was the copy that got translated elsewhere and was duplicated. Now, this is a logical possibility. The trouble with this one, though, is that there is no evidence to suggest an error in the manuscript tradition. And so you may find manuscript variants that attempt to correct this, but basically the manuscript tradition is no bueno. It's no good. It doesn't help you get out of this alleged contradiction. And rather, we should consider some other possible solutions. Think about B, Jesus erred or embellished. Now, I'm uncomfortable saying Jesus erred. Now, for someone like Bart, he might just say Jesus made a mistake. There's another option here with category B, that Jesus embellished. And this maybe has to deal with option D. We'll get into what constitutes as an embellishment. What's the semantic range when we think of this phrase, when Abiathar was the high priest? In the day, some interpretations, some translations even of the Greek say in the days of Abiathar. So what is the semantic range of this phrase, in the days of? Does that count as qualifying? And the reason why I say that is because when you look at the narrative, it does get interesting. And I suppose we could jump over to the historical narratives. Let me find where I've got 1 Samuel up. Okay, so it's really helpful to understand the historical narrative and what's transpired here. So that way you can be better informed about what exactly is going on in Mark 2 and what is Jesus referencing. Okay, so you've got to read 1 Samuel 20 to 23 to see this whole narrative, this arc occurring, because that may help to better understand what Jesus means and whether we can, in good conscience, view in the days of Abiathar as applying. So you've got David and Jonathan. Jonathan warns David that Saul, his dad, is trying to kill him. And so David, he's warned to run away, to flee. David is the anointed. He's the future king of Israel. Saul wants to kill him because Saul wants to retain the throne. So he feels threatened. He's angered. And so Jonathan, his son, warns David to flee. And this is exactly what David does. So that's 1 Samuel 20. And then when we get to 21, if it'll play nice. So here's the narrative. Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And you have this narrative, this historical narrative of Ahimelech saying, hey, I'm not going to feed your soldiers the holy bread because, maybe they're not in a clean state. Maybe they've had their way with women. And David's like, no, they're good. And so Ahimelech says, okay. And they eat the bread. And now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there the day, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And so he was sort of a witness of these events. And so David continues on fleeing to Gath. You can see here I'm scrolling through the narrative. I would encourage you to take the time and read through it. And then he hides out in a cave. And maybe you've heard sermons about this passage. Pastors have tended to use this narrative in their sermons from time to time as they are trying to explain the narrative to their flock. And so what happens then while David is at the cave hiding out, Saul kills the priests because through this witness, Doeg the Edomite, he says that he saw Ahimelech giving aid to David. And again, David is Saul's enemy at this time. And so what Saul has done is he has the priests killed. And none of the faithful Israelites will kill the priests. Saul lets out he gives this instruction. And the servants of the king would not put their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Right there. You've got this 1 Samuel. This is chapter 22, verse 17. Then the king said to Doeg, maybe we could say Doeg, but it looks like Doeg. You turn and strike the priest. So the Edomite, the guy who's not really faithful to Israel, he's an Edomite. He turns and strikes down the priests. He kills the priests, the high priest and the other priests. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. So that's how Abiathar, he was clearly one of the priests. He escapes and he goes to David. So that's how David knew of what transpired. And so you have this narrative, this multi-chapter narrative that you see here about how Abiathar is the last remaining priest. So one possible interpretation, getting back to possible solutions, is that by virtue of process of elimination, while the events have transpired within this narrative, Abiathar is the high priest. He is the remaining one. He is the only one of the class remaining. And therefore, he is the one fit to be high priest. So that's one solution, that the semantic range of in the days of Abiathar reference the narrative. Jesus is referencing the course of these events. So there is this semantic range that we might use to recognize that Jesus isn't precisely trying to say at that exact moment Abiathar was the high priest when David ate the bread, but rather it's a reference point to this course of events. So that's one logically possible way of analyzing this text and this alleged contradiction in Mark 2. So here, I've got interlinear up, so if you know Greek, you can look at the Greek. Of course, Bart Ehrman knows Greek. He reads Greek New Testament in his sleep. So I'm not disputing that I know the Greek better than Bart, but we can also look over here how this Greek epi here is commonly translated in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and the loaves of the presentation ate, which not it is lawful to eat. So you can see here, I'm giving wooden word-for-word reading from the interlinear. You can see here that there is this range of in the days of Abiathar, and that perhaps what Jesus is referencing is this course of events. This is, what I'm proposing here, is one solution that some scholars take, and they provide other examples of this. Dan Wallace details some of this in his article on the subject. But when you go to Bible.org, you can search for Mark 2:26 and the problem of Abiathar. And here's Dan Wallace, who has debated Bart, and so he knows his subject material. He's a very fine, high-class New Testament scholar. In this article, he deals with these proposed solutions to this quandary of Abiathar. Okay, let me talk about a few more of these categories here for logically possible solutions to this. So, manuscript error is kind of out. The tradition doesn't show us anything. You could hypothesize it as a possible solution. But what's possible isn't always plausible. And so some of these B, C, and D seem more plausible. So for B, when I say, did Jesus embellish? Well, perhaps he's using this phrase epi to refer to, again, the course of events, not just that singular, precise moment in history. Let me talk about C, source error or embellished. So one option is to think that in history, Jesus actually said Ahimelech, but that Peter misrecollected. And so when he conveyed this to Mark, who was the recorder for his gospel, Peter misstated and put Abiathar, so Mark wrote Abiathar. And so you might think that the source erred. Now another possible solution here is that Mark himself made the error, that maybe Peter said Ahimelech and Mark misrecollected, so there's an author error. Now there's still an error in the text, but you might say, well, but it wasn't Jesus who made that error. So again, these are logically possible solutions. You might also think that Mark or Peter, through their teaching, is the one who used a broader sense of in the days of. They were the ones using the semantic range, this sort of embellishing of how we can use language to refer to a course of events. So, for example, in the book of Moses, well, which one are you referring to? You're referring to the Pentateuch, for example? Which one? So, people will refer to it in the books of Moses. That's sort of a referent. There's a specific grammatical term I'm forgetting right now, but it's sort of used as a reference to refer to broader semantical range. Okay, fourth, maybe there's just an interpretation error here. Maybe there's something happening that Jesus meant to convey that we just don't understand because we're trying to view this with a rigid historical lens. And so while Jesus' audience would have known what he meant, we don't. So we've kind of have something that's been lost in translation. And so that doesn't mean that there is an error in Jesus' teaching or in the text itself, but rather on our end, our inability to understand what exactly is being taught here. So Wallace says, hey, a lot of these are plausible. He basically rejects the manuscript and far more persuasive for proposed solutions, plausible solutions. And I don't want to push away, though, the weight of how many people may read this and think, boy, there's an error in the text, and the house of cards comes falling down. The way Ehrman described it, it was the floodgates opened. The last thing we want to do, if we want to have a well-structured mind on this, I think, is we don't want to let one issue cause the whole house to fall apart. Even a crack in a foundation is simply a crack. It doesn't mean the house has fallen over. And this is what happens, sadly, for many people, that there's a crack in the foundation, and then through magic, and I brought up the angels one because that's so easy to understand, that simply because a person refers in a narrative to one person doesn't mean there weren't two people, right? That's not, the angel example is not a contradiction in the least. The Abiathar example is a difficult passage to deal with, unlike the angels at the tomb. So we need to evaluate the entirety of the case, have a cumulative case that we need to assess before the floodgates open or the house comes crumbling down. make that list. Feel free to write to me at veracityhill.com. Use the contact form. If you have questions about how we need to deal with these solutions, do some Googling as well. There are other people that have put out proposed solutions, and not just logically possible solutions, but well-researched, crafted, plausible ways of dealing with the texts. Okay, let's get back and jump to 2 and 3 as we deal with Bart Ehrman's top 3 alleged contradictions. Again, here's this article by Dan Wallace. If you want to do a deep dive, I'll scroll just for you to see. This is a deeper dive. He goes into various other scholars dealing with the solutions that other scholars have proposed. So if you want something far more high level than what I'm giving you is sort of like tip of the iceberg. Here are categories for how to deal with this. This one goes way more in depth. Okay, but let's look at his second alleged contradiction.
In the Gospel of Mark, I think it's chapter 5, there's a man who's a leader of a synagogue, whose daughter has gotten sick, and he comes up to Jesus and he says to Jesus, "My daughter's sick, and could you come heal her because she's going to die?" And Jesus.
I see Amateur Knight saying no audio. Amateur, let me know, is this no audio from the video or none from the microphone? I'll ask you. But hopefully we'll get this figured out. Oh, he says, okay, I can hear now. Okay, I don't know if it was just me or if it was the computer here. I'll rewind and we'll get back here.
His daughter has gotten sick.
Jairus' daughter is the example.
He comes up to Jesus and he says to Jesus, "My daughter's sick, and could you come heal her because she's going to die?" And Jesus says, "Okay." So Jesus starts going to his house, and before he can get there, he gets interrupted. Another thing happens. Somebody bothers, and he has to deal with this other thing. And by this time, the man's daughter's died. So he gets there, and it's too late. She's dead. I'm too late. Jesus says, "Don't worry about it. I'll heal her." And so he goes into the room. She's dead. And he raises her from the dead. That's Mark's gospel. Matthew's gospel says that what happened is, this guy's name is Jarius, by the way. His name is Jarius. So this is the story of Jairus' daughter, Jairus. And so,
not to be confused with Jairus, Jaros. This is Jairus' daughter, not Jairus' daughter.
in Matthew, it says, this man Jairus comes up to Jesus and he says, my daughter has just died. Can you do anything about it?
So you see the difference here. In Mark's gospel, daughter is dying at the point of death. I'm going to put up the passages here so we can look at the Greek verbs. And in Matthew, has died. So you have present progressive, and then you have past tense.
In Mark's gospel, she wasn't dead yet. The whole point is she wasn't deed yet. But right. In Matthew, she comes up, "My daughter died. Can you do?" So Jesus goes and he raises her from the dead. Okay, but it's like, which was it? It couldn't be both. So when I was a graduate student, I started to leave my view of the inerrancy of the Bible, that it was infallible. And we had a visiting scholar from Scandinavia who was a very famous scholar who thought, he had these ideas about things and who thought that there weren't mistakes in the New Testament. So I said, okay, so you got with the story of Jarius, like she's sick and then she dies, and the other one, she's dead ahead of time. So I said, which is it? And he said to me, it happened twice. First time it happened, the girl was sick and then she died.
This is a common tactic for those that are harmonizing passages, is to posit that the event happened twice. It's been a common tactic, a way of dealing with these alleged contradictions, to say, well, this thing happened twice, or the rooster crowed 6 times instead of 3 times. So you're sort of adding these variables, you're smashing the passages together, and you begin to duplicate events rather than realizing that these evangelists are referring to the same singular event with their different perspective, their different literary proposals, the way that they wanted to convey the story faithfully, I think, reliably from a historical perspective, the different ways for doing so, and we'll get into that momentarily. But that was the way this Scandinavian scholar went about it, and that just does not seem palatable to many of us to propose that Jairus' daughter died twice.
And later, like in a later episode, she died again, and she was, oh my God, are you serious?
Oh, man.
And so I'll give you the third instance I'll give you.
Okay, before he gets to the third one, let us review. Let's talk about Jairus' daughter. And let's look at the passage here. So Mark 5:23. My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. And the Greek there, you might see, if you know a little bit of Greek, you know a little bit about the letters eschatos, right? Eschatology, end times, last things. And you have the this point, so the way it's translated commonly is she's at the point of death, or she is dying, or she is about to die. Eke eschatos. So, in Matthew, however, Matthew 9:18 says, my daughter has just died. And you have a different verb here. But come and lay your hand on her and she will live. So you have one that's present tense, and you have a verb that is past tense. Here is my recommendation to you. We could try to say something like, this is a broad paraphrase. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure exactly how exactly that would meld, that you'd fit the two with the different tenses. But I think it's key that we read the pericope to see how the author is using language to faithfully construct the history of the events. Read the pericope. Don't get caught up in the detail here, and I'll explain why in a moment. Because when we see the forest through the tree, or the two trees that we're looking at, and when we see the forest, we can better understand the details. When we see the big picture of what's happening in the passage, the pericope, and we compare them side by side, we can understand what's happening. So I've done a little bit of that for you. So compare Mark 5 with Matthew 9. And I've given some verses here. Hopefully they're big enough on the screen for you. Mark 5:23, this is at the point of death, aka she has not yet died. Keep reading this story. And what happens then all the way in verse 30, now what happens in between this event is the woman with the bleeding comes and touches the cloak. This is sort of like something that happens in between Jairus meeting Jesus, the woman touching his cloak, and then we come back to Jairus, the events of Jairus and his daughter. So get to verse 35, and you see from Mark's account, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. There are servants, there are either people or servants that have come out of the house to report the news to Jairus. This is news to him that his daughter is dead. So, verse 23, she's at the point of death, aka she has not yet died. Now people come out of his house and say she's dead. They've reported the news. Verse 38, they arrive, so Jesus, Jairus, and a couple of his disciples arrive, and the ruler says to the people there, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Now, I think a charitable interpretation here is not that Jairus is in denial, that the girl hasn't died, and that she's only sleeping, she's in a coma or something. I think he realizes she's dead. What he means here is that his faith in Jesus is so strong that it is as if the girl were actually sleeping, and that Jesus is going to bring her back to life. I think that's the way we charitably interpret verse 38, because it also that passage also appears in verse 29 of Matthew 9. Verse 23 of Matthew 9. So let's compare. Again, let me quickly rehash this. Mark 5:23, she's at the point of death, aka she hasn't died. Then verse 35, some people come out of the house, they report the news to him. And then Jesus goes in and brings her back to life. Matthew 9. This is where we have the daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live. And then you have the passage of the woman who's touching the cloak. And then we get caught, then we get brought back to when Jesus arrived. I could load up the passage there in full. But the key here is that with verse 23, and when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players in the crowd making commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." You've got that same line. That same line appears in Mark and Matthew. What's different about Matthew's gospel? What's different about in Matthew's account is that you do not have the people coming to report the news. It seems as if Matthew has struck out that event, that micro event, from his narrative. He has shortened the story. Matthew has edited out, if Mark were written first and Matthew came second, Matthew has edited out. So if you believe Mark's gospel was written first, like Bart does, we can simply see this as a form of an editorial decision on Matthew's part. Now, if you take out the people that deliver the news, then it becomes awkward. The story doesn't make sense. What you have to do is for the narrative's sake, you modify the tense of what Jarius reports. So she isn't at the point of death. She's not about to die, but she has died. So he's simplified the narrative in order to faithfully, reliably construct the historical events that occurred in a simpler way. In this regard, we wouldn't say that there's an error. When someone simplifies a story for you, even in common parlance, we wouldn't be so pedantic to say, hey, there's an error there. We show charitability in our communication when people make literary changes. They have literary license to make editorial changes for our sake. It's a good intention. We don't think that Matthew was intending to mislead his audience. We don't think that that's what he's doing when he makes that change, or if he makes that change. We could just pose it hypothetically, for example. We wouldn't say that Matthew is intentionally misleading people, nor would we say that Matthew is intentionally putting in an error. There is no error here, if that's what Matthew has done. And I think this is a highly plausible solution to this alleged contradiction. When we read the pericope, we see that in Matthew's gospel, there is no one bringing the news out to Jarius, unlike in Mark's gospel. And so Matthew has to simplify and make the story still make sense. So he does so in a way that he changes the verb tense. And I don't think that's an error. I don't think that means there's this contradiction. It's a surface level contradiction. It's on the surface, but in reality, it is not a contradiction, and it's easily understood. So, again, to Bart's earlier point about fundamentalism, if this leads you to reconsider your fundamentalist perspective, please, it doesn't mean that the story is historically unreliable. And if you were to ask Bart, how would you reconcile what is meant here? Now, maybe he would say, well, there was an error. Someone made an error. And I think that's still a fundamentalist interpretation of the text. But Bart's just put on a different jersey now. He's still reading the text in that same way. But having read some more academic perspectives, academic work of Bart, I also know that he knows and he believes that the Gospels are of the category of Greco-Roman biography. And so I think if you were to push Bart, he might be a bit more charitable in how to interpret this passage. Now, I won't say that's the case with the Abiathar passage, but I think in this case he might recognize literary license has been employed by Matthew on Mark's version of the story. So maybe I'd like to push him. Maybe he'll see this video and respond, or maybe I'll get it posted at his blog site. We'll see. Maybe I'll reach out to him with this. But I think that's the way we should deal with number 2 example, Jairus' daughter. And let me, just for your sake, and while we transition to the 3rd example, let's pull it up here. So you can see for yourself here with Bible Gateway. Man, so many ads. Look, did you know you can actually pull this all up? You can have the parallel passages. Let me full screen this. My apologies. You don't want to see all those icons. You can pull up the parallel passages. So Mark 5, here you go. And let me show for you here. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. There it is. This is in Mark's version. And let's scroll to Matthew's, and you will see it's much shorter. Even just compare. Look, it's the parallel passage. It's the same pericope. Matthew's account is literally shorter in text. It's a shorter version of the story, and it includes both events. So here you have Jairus, right? The ruler came, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand or she will live. Jesus rose, behold a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood. So this event happens in between. And then when Jesus came to the ruler's house, saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping. Again, that same line appears in Matthew and Mark. They laughed at him, but when the crowd had been put outside, he went in, took her by the hand, and the girl arose. You do not have... Matthew has shortened the story. That is one very plausible solution that I find persuasive. Okay, let's get to the 3rd example. 3rd and final example here as we look at Bart's top 3 alleged New Testament contradictions.
Is one that I just recently I thought was really, really quite good. A year and a half ago, right before COVID hit, in February 2020, I was in Chicago at a Christian apologists conference. So as you know, Christian apologists are...
That's me. He's talking about my event that he was at.
are defenders of the faith. They're conservative evangelicals or fundamentalists who think...
The audio was a little unclear on his end. I hope he said conservative evangelicals or fundamentalists, because of course not all conservative evangelicals would consider themselves fundamentalists, depending upon what one means by that term, fundamentalist. Well, I feel like Jordan Peterson there. It depends what fundamentalist means.
That, you know, that they can defend everything in the faith, that it's all logical, makes sense, and they can argue for it.
Well, I mean, I agree with that. If that's his definition, then I guess I've got to buy it.
This conference was on whether the Bible's contradictions in it or not, whether the Gospels have contradictions.
Yeah, it's gospel differences.
They had 3 speakers there who were all very conservative evangelical apologists.
That's funny because he says they're very conservative. When you survey the field of New Testament scholarship, I would not put Craig Keener and Mike Licona as very conservative. They are not like other New Testament scholars that would harmonize the texts or think that, for instance, there's, I think one scholar at the Master's Seminary, Farrell, I think is his name. I'm blanking on the fellow's name. I think it's Farrell. It's been years since I've thought of him. He believes that there is no literary dependency between the 4 Gospels. Now, that's like a really fundamentalist position. That's like a far right. That there is no, that he believes that the evangelists wrote independently of each other. That's really far right. So compare that to Keener and Licona, and when you say, for example, Norm Geisler's view on now Geisler was a theologian and philosopher, but on his views on New Testament scholarship, he would be, very right, very conservative compared to Keener and Licona when you survey the field. So I don't know if that's what Bart's intending to convey here, but I wouldn't place those 2 as far as others.
And they had me because they wanted to hear another side of the story, and they wanted to see what they were up against. And so I went. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I thought, this may not be good, but it was great. I had a great time. They were really nice. They were pleasant. We had jokes. We laughed. And there were a group of students there from Moody.
Yeah, I'll say this. Thank you, Bart. Yes, I had a nice time, and I really am glad that you did as well, and very much would be open to doing another event in the future. So I'm glad you had a nice time. That was now, I guess, almost, it'll be 6 years. Time flies. COVID was weird. Yeah, time was hard to grasp that year. But it has been now a handful of years, and I enjoyed my time with you. So thanks again for coming to Chicago back in 2019, that was.
Bible Institute, where I had gone out of high school. So I was a graduate when I was a fundamentalist. And so I said, oh my God, let's have lunch together. They said, yeah, great. So we had lunch, and it was great. We told stories. It was a great time. But so we're having this thing, and I lay out the argument why there are contradictions, and these other guys are saying, yeah, no, they aren't contradictions. Michael Licona was one of the presenters there, who's one of the leading apologists today. He's a serious guy, and he has a PhD in New Testament studies, and so he's written books defending the Christian faith, including why you have these seem to have discrepancies in the Gospels. His view is that you do have these differences in the Gospels, but it's because the Gospel writers are following standard protocols for how you write biographies in the ancient world. So authors like Plutarch, for example, will write a biography, and he takes certain licenses and he does things in a certain way because it's just how you do a biography. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John, they wrote biographies. So, they're just following the biographers do things. And so in places it looks like you had discrepancies. So we give our talks, and Mike does his thing, I do my thing. And afterwards, the moderator gets up, who's also a conservative evangelical, and he says, okay, so the four of you, I've got a question. I want you all to answer this. In Mark's gospel, Jesus sends out the disciples on his mission during his ministry to go out and heal the sick and cast out demons. And he says to them, don't take a backpack, don't take extra sandals, don't take any money, don't take a staff, just go. And so there you go. In Matthew's gospel, same episode, Jesus sends them out, go heal the sick, raise the dead, or cast out demons, and don't take a backpack, don't take extra sandals, don't take any extra money, and take a staff. Just the opposite of what Mark says. Mm-hmm. So the moderator says, okay, which did Jesus say? And I said, well, he probably said neither, because I don't think it's historical. I said, but I said, Mark's the earlier one. So when Mark says, don't take a staff, Matt says he did take a staff. It's a contradiction. And he asked the other two. The other two kind of reconcile. They hemmed and hawed and come figure out some way. Oh, maybe it happened twice, or so they kind of thing. Yeah. We got to Licona. Mike Licona says, well, Mark is right. He said what Mark says, don't take a staff. Okay. And then the moderator says, okay, to everybody, do you think Matthew's account is inerrant? I said, no. The other two said yes. And Licona says, yes, it's inerrant. I said, Mike, you just said that Matthew contradicts Mark. It's the opposite of what Mark says. Mark says, don't take a staff. Matthew says, take a staff. And that's the opposite. So, but now you're saying it's not an error.
Yeah, and the reason why Mike says, Mike's view of inerrancy is closer to the idea that the author had intentional purpose for the way that he wrote. And so the text says what the author meant to convey. What Licona wants to ward off against is the idea that we apply our standards on the evangelist and our own expectations of what the author should have said when he wrote the way he did. So, for example, if we were to say, for example, that Jesus makes a historical claim when he talks about a parable, we are applying a genre that's not appropriate on a parable, because a parable is a fictional narrative. So Licona wants to ward off from that happening.
And I said, what would it be an error if a contradiction's not an error? He said, well, but Matthew meant to change it because he's following the protocols of writing biographers. So he knew what he was doing, so he changed it. Said, look, Mike, it doesn't matter if he meant to do it. Some people mean to lie.
Oh, as my computer's glitching.
But just because they mean to lie doesn't mean it's not a lie.
All right, so let's attend to this alleged contradiction. And the reason why this is fun is because, let's see if this will play in PowerPoint. I don't know if it will, but I've loaded up the clip that he's referring to. So here it is. You've got Keener on the right, Lacona, Ehrman, Rob Bowman, and myself. And we'll see if this plays here in PowerPoint. I'm not sure if it will. We will find out here. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We have two seemingly conflicting
It's
passages.
playing for me. Let's see if it
Mark
plays.
6:8.
All right.
Says, these were his instructions.
Yes, it's just very small. Oh, no. I clicked off and it's gone off now. Let's go back. It's about the 55-minute mark, and you can hear this interaction. You know, I think YouTube's having a little trouble here in PowerPoint, so let's just go directly to a YouTube page here. Okay.
Hey, we have two seemingly conflicting
All right,
passages.
I want you to spend a couple minutes and watch this interaction, and then I'll explain the way that I would understand this alleged contradiction.
Mark 6:8 says, these were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey.
Just watching this, this was such a fun panel discussion. To have the different perspectives of these scholars, these New Testament scholars. Bowman is a theologian as well. I know he's and an apologist. He's got quite the repertoire himself. A bit more on the conservative side, he represented the harmonizing position. And then you've got Bart Ehrman, of course, that there are errors in the texts. Lycona and Keener are in closer camps together, but they've got their own distinctive approaches to how they would understand these things.
Except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Luke 9:3. As it reloads, says to take nothing.
Oh, so I used Luke, which is, of course, a parallel passage from Luke. And what's interesting, we'll get into it, Luke uses the same verb as Matthew. Matthew and Mark use different verbs in the Greek, but Luke, I think, means something different. So this is one issue that I've spent a little bit more time studying because it was perplexing. It's been brought up in conversations I've had with people in my life. And so I've looked at this one a little more in depth.
Not even a staff, okay? It's the equivalent parallel account, reading horizontally. So the trivia question is this. Did the disciples take a staff?
Let's fast forward and get to their interactions.
And yes, probably. A question mark. Half of them did. Yes, probably yes.
So Bowman, quite humble guy. I think he put a question mark. He wasn't sure.
Okay, let's go through quick explanations. Under 60 seconds.
I really don't know, but I would lean towards saying yes, they took a staff.
Told them not to, so they probably didn't.
Matthew and Luke say not to take one. Mark says to take one. I think if we'd been there, Jesus said take one, but either Matthew, Luke, or the source from which they drew changed it in order to make the point more clearly that they were to rely on God for everything. The point, I think, is there with Mark, but Matthew...
So I think this is... So I'm with Mike on this. The way he described this, what is the message? That the disciples were not to take things in preparation for their trip, that they would take only what's on them, on their person. And so keep that in mind when we jump into the text, but let's listen to this interaction a little bit
Luke
more.
or their source want to make it all the more clearer, so they
You
simplify.
think they're reliable when they change it?
Yeah, because
So he
because
said-
they're
he said-
communicating the gist accurately.
So he said take it,
Yep,
and,
that's correct.
and they're accurate in
Yes,
the reports.
in the gist of what they're reporting. Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's that interaction that Bart was just talking about. On the MythVision podcast, he's talking about this little interaction he had with Mike, and that was it. You just heard it.
I think probably I would agree with Mike on that. In terms of the main point there, I do want to qualify something from earlier, where Bart asked me if I believe, the events in the Gospels. That I'm not saying that my historical methodology takes me that far, and like Rob was saying, Gospels are different, oral tradition's different. It doesn't guarantee those things. So I go, beyond the evidence that I have on faith, but the evidence I have, I think, points towards reliability. But he asked me what I believed, and so I said what I believe is personally. Yeah.
Okay, so that was that little interaction just on that question, this panel discussion, which is at the Veracity Hill YouTube channel. You can search Gospel Difference Conference Panel, and you can see there if you want to watch the full thing. Okay, now let me attend to not just a logically possible solution, because this one is a bit more tricky than the Jarius example. The Jarius example, number 2 of Ehrman's, to me, I think is far clearer what's happened in that text. I think Matthew has edited down Mark's gospel. He shortened Mark's version of the story. And so with number 3 here, the staff or no staff, this is trickier because they seem to suggest at the surface, take a staff, accept a staff, take nothing, accept a staff, and no staff, don't take anything. Well, let's compare. So now I know I brought up Luke in that actual panel, and what Bart brought up was in this MythVision interview was the pericope from Matthew. And so Bart had a misrecollection there. But nevertheless, he faithfully conveyed the issue that was discussed between himself and Mike. Observe here how Bart made a precise historical miscue, that the interaction was not about the difference between Mark and Matthew, but the difference between Mark and Luke was what was brought up at the panel discussion. But nevertheless, Bart has conveyed reliably the issue at stake. That's what's important, I think, in some of these conversations, that even if you get this peripheral details wrong, what's conveyed is still the truth. The truth is still reliably conveyed. And that's something that I'd love for you to think about. That even if the peripheral details are inaccurately conveyed, the truth is still reliably conveyed. Okay. Mark 6 and Matthew 10. So, Mark 6, 8-9, he charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. This is the ESV I've got here in English. Notice that Greek verb, to take, and my pronunciation of Greek is not going to be strong. I'm sure there'll be Greek scholars that are going to laugh at me. So I would say erosin. Now in Matthew, you have a different Greek verb. Matthew 10, 9-10. And so the ESV already provides a plausible way out of this alleged contradiction. Look at this. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts. Interesting. He charged them to take nothing for their journey, Mark 2, take nothing for their journey except a staff, and Matthew, acquire. So one plausible way out of this solution, a plausible way, is to recognize here that Jesus charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, that they actually took their staffs and their sandals, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. Notice here in Matthew, acquire no gold, silver, or copper, no bag, or 2 tunics, or sandals. So don't acquire sandals. But then Mark says that sandals are okay to wear. What could be happening here with these different Greek verbs? one way to recognize this is that what Jesus meant with acquiring, and that what Matthew is teaching about what Jesus taught, what Matthew is teaching about what Jesus taught, is that the disciples, this passage is called the limited commission. He sends the 12 out. What's happened here is that Matthew's conveying that the disciples were not to acquire anything beyond what they had on their person, so that they were not to go prepare for their flight, right? Let's say I give you a plane ticket and say, hey, you got to go to New York City right now. Do not go to Target to buy a sweater. You got to go. Take what's on you. Don't take anything else except what's on you, and get to the airport and go. Though the way I just described that analogy is perfectly compatible with the wording of Mark 6 and the wording of Matthew 10, that you are not to acquire anything else. You are not to acquire anything, but take only what is on your person, the shoes you're wearing, the clothes on your back, the staff that you have in your hand. You can take those things. So notice there, again, Mark 6, he charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics, aka 1 tunic's okay. Matthew 10, acquire none of this monetary currency, no gold, no silver, copper. Don't bring any money with you. No bag for your journey, because as you're going, the laborer deserves his food. As you're journeying, God will provide. So you can still take, so I think if you had to ask me, well, what is it? I believe that the disciples, the 12, they did wear sandals and they took a staff, but they did not bring extra supplies with them. That is the way to understand what the difference between these two passages. Now, I'm fully aware that this is classically a harmonization of these passages. I don't think that Jesus taught the same thing at 2 different events. This is the same event, but what Matthew is conveying, what Mark is conveying, and what Luke is conveying is all the same thing. And that there is no actual contradiction between these accounts of what Jesus taught to his 12. And that's what's important. They were to not acquire anything for their trip, but take what was on their person. And that solution, which seems very plausible about Jesus' instruction, accommodates the language of Mark 6 and Matthew 10, and even the Luke passage as well. Okay, so that's the way I would understand this third example that Bart raises. And I do not find that there's a contradiction between this third example or the second example. The first one is trickier, where there's not necessarily a clear-cut solution. It remains tricky, but nevertheless, I want to share something I saw this morning from a fellow Christian apologist, Jonathan McClatchy. He wrote on Facebook, if only people would strive to get a firm handle on the positive case for Christianity and feel its weight, many of the objections to Christianity would begin to feel a lot more trivial. And that's the way, I loved what he wrote. That's the way I feel about the Abiathar passage, that it seems quite trivial, that there is a way of understanding it in such a way that the house of cards doesn't need to come crashing down. The floodgates don't need to open, because we see what a strong case there is for the historical reliability of the Gospels, and a good case to be made for the inerrancy of the text. Now, maybe you're not going to agree with me on the inerrancy of the text, but I think you'll see that there is a strong case for the Christian worldview, and I hope that you'll consider it and not allow the list of alleged contradictions to be too daunting for you. All right, well, that does it for episode 251. I am glad that you stuck with me here as we surveyed these 3 alleged contradictions. 2 of them are easily solved, and I hope that maybe Bart will give me some interaction on the proposed solutions here. And I would love to know what you think Are my proposed solutions totally misguided? Am I stuck in a quandary? Are we to dismiss the Christian worldview altogether because there may, even though I don't think there may be some cracks in the foundation? Again, as I said earlier, a crack here or there of a foundation doesn't mean the house comes falling down. So even if there are challenges and difficulties, it doesn't mean that Jesus is not the Messiah. Unfortunately, I think so many people, their religious experience included that thought process that if there was even one plausible error in the text, they gave up their Christian faith altogether. And that seems so hasty and rushed. And it's sad, and I have pity on people that had that experience. All right, well, that does it for the show today. I am grateful for the continued support of our patrons. Those are people that just chip in a few bucks each month. Please consider becoming a partner with us here at Veracity Hill. You can go to veracityhill.com/donate and also consider chipping in a one-time gift as part of our $10,000 challenge grant. We'd love to have your financial support to sustain Veracity Hill. Thank you for your consideration of supporting God's kingdom work through this ministry specifically. I am grateful for the partnerships that we have with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Apologetics 315, and Rethinking Hell. I want to thank the team at Defenders Media, Gabe, Mark, Beth, Dante, Kyle, Sophia, Peter, Kevin, and any other people that I've forgotten, freelancers like Chris, our old friend Chris, who we had on our program last week as we reflected back on the 250,000 mark of Veracity Hill. Thank you to the team for all that they do to support this ministry of Veracity Hill and at Defenders Media as well. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank you for watching or for listening in as we're striving for truth on alleged New Testament contradictions.
This has been Veracity Hill, a viewer and listener supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.